Thanks for joining us. Cardinal George Pell is probably the most hated man in Australia, if you believe the media. He's been called a coward, a sociopath, someone who protected pedophile priests. And for 4 gruelling days in Rome this week, he gave evidence to the Royal Commission into child sexual abuse and was grilled about what he knew about the pedophile priests, first in the Diocese of Ballarat and then in Melbourne. Now, if you believe Cardinal Pell, he was lied to. He was lied to by his bishop in Ballarat, Ronald Malkerns, and then by his Archbishop in Melbourne, Frank Little. He knew nothing, and when he did know something and became Archbishop himself of Melbourne, he took action. Well, the Royal Commission seemed to think that story unbelievable. It virtually called him a liar to his face. It said his stories were implausible. But just as implausible, I think, is probably the other side of the story. And that is that we have the 3rd most senior Catholic in the world, in the Vatican, effectively the treasurer, sitting there in the witness box for 4 days telling lies after lies after lies, and before that, defending pedophiles as they rape children. So, which one of these implausible stories is true? George Pell, the sociopathic liar, or George Pell, the person who reformed this tremendous scandal? Well, we're about to let you decide for yourself by meeting Cardinal Pell. But before we start, I need to point out 2 things because there is so much misinformation yet again going out about this interview. No, I'm not a friend of Cardinal Pell. We met socially, briefly, on 4 occasions before I came to Rome. Secondly, no conditions have been put on this interview, and what you will see is unedited, as you can tell, and it's entirely up to you what you make of what is about to happen. Cardinal Pell, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.
Being hated like this being called a coward and scum on high rotation by the mainstream media, this is not just Twitter abuse. How devastating is that for you?
Well, it's very, very difficult and very upsetting, and there's no way around it, and I've steadily tried to put out what is the truth. Now, if I could perhaps go a little bit out of sequence, one of the things that helped me in my meeting with the Ballarat victims, despite the fact that I'd left Ballarat over 30 years ago, was that they knew me. Not all of them, but a number of them. I'd helped some of them. I'd helped their family members. And so they knew at first hand what I was really like, as distinct from this evil, insensitive stereotype that is being pushed.
I want to talk to you about that later, because there was something about your meeting that struck me very powerfully. But first, there's not just been the personal attacks, the attacks on you. There's been the attacks on your church, and for good reason, I have to say. Your church, right, stands condemned, and rightly, for hiding pedophiles, for the rape of hundreds of children, for covering up, for telling lies, and now we have lives destroyed, families destroyed, and the church's reputation destroyed. How do you feel about your church when you see this catastrophe in front of you?
Oh, well, very, very sad. First of all for the survivors, but sad also, I mean, often as well as their personality, their individual suffering, often their faith is damaged, if not destroyed. What we must be clear about, though, in fairness, is that it was 20 years ago we got into gear to deal with these things. We set up Towards Healing, we set up the Melbourne response. Now, I'm very keen that this is not forgotten, because a lot of very good people have worked very hard for 20 years to deal with these crimes. People like Peter O'Callaghan, Father John Asher, Michael Salmon, and many others, Brother Julian MacDonald.
So the era of cover-up is past?
Well, substantially finished 20 years ago.
All right, well, let's introduce you into how this all came about. Your father owned a pub in Ballarat. You were born in Ballarat.
Yes.
I believe your father was a heavyweight boxing champion from England.
No, he wasn't from England. He's an Aussie. He boxed under the name of Bell because his mother didn't approve, but he was the leading contender for the heavyweight championship, I think, in the British Empire, so he wasn't too bad.
Should a man of the cloth take such pride in a pugilist?
Well, I certainly do. I very much admire my dad.
Good on you. So you then chose the church. Now, you were quite good at school. You were a good sportsman too. You even made the seconds at the VFL, now the AFL. Why did you decide to become a priest instead?
Reluctantly, because I thought God was calling me to do that, and I couldn't shake off that conviction.
What did you want to do with it?
What did I want to do with it?
What did you want to do with this calling, with your priesthood?
Well, to serve God and to serve the people.
Okay. You went to Oxford, you studied in Rome as well, and in Ballarat. You came to back to Ballarat in 1973. Did you have any idea that in Ballarat this was the actual epicentre where some of the worst paedophilia in the church was occurring? With one school, something like 4 pedophiles, active pedophiles, preying on children. Did you have any idea that this was such a plagued diocese?
No, I was aware that a man called Monsignor Day in '72 had been exposed as a pedophile, but I had no idea that it was one of the worst centres in Australia. No idea beyond that at all.
And incredibly, you actually shared accommodation for a little while with one of the, well, in fact, the worst pedophile, Gerald Ridsdale. So you're both in the same presbytery. How did Ridsdale strike you as a man?
We were together for 10 months. Somewhat unusual man. I didn't warm to him, but by the same token, we never clashed. He was capable. People didn't complain to me about his manner, as sometimes people would about other priests. You know, they talk to priest friends, and they didn't. He was a mystery man, I suppose we'd say subsequently.
And looking back, is there anything you say, well, look, gosh, I missed that, or I missed that aspect of his behaviour, I should have picked it up?
No, I once celebrated Mass after him, and I remember his vestments were there, and they were sopping wet. From some tension or something like that, and I remember noticing that at the time, and I thought, well, you know, he's a very tense man, but that's the only particular characteristic that I can remember.
Man, did anyone come up to you in all the years you were in Ballarat and say, you know that bloke Ridsdale that you shared a house with, watch out?
No, not. See, I left Ballarat 31 years ago. There's a lot of water to go under the bridge after that, but no, they didn't say that to me when I was in Ballarat.
After a few years, you were appointed as one of the consultors. You were an up-and-coming young man. You'd had well-educated, smart, seen as a man of the future.
Yes.
You were appointed one of the consultors of the Bishop of Ballarat, Ronald Mulcairns.
Yes.
Now, it's beyond question. It's admitted. It's proven. Mulcairns knew that Ridsdale and other pedophile priests were under his watch, under his control, and he was moving them around and around and around. As soon as things got too hot one place, he'd move them somewhere else where they abused children again. Now, you're sitting there as a consultant, and you're hearing that Ridsdale is being moved again and again, unusually often. What did you ask about this?
Well, it wasn't as unusual as you might think, because in those days we had plenty of young priests, and the practice was to give them 3 years in a place and then move them on. Now, his record is not like that. It was obvious he had either he was restless or had some sort of personality problem, but
Personality problem. When people discussed this personality problem, what were they calling it?
Well, no, they didn't. I can't recall any specific discussion like that. And I can't remember any specific discussion of a personality problem of Ridsdale.
So there was one notorious thing of a time, of course, where Ridsdale had to do a midnight flit from one place where he was essentially caught with a boy and having abused children. And this matter came before your consultors. Now, around that table...
No, that matter never came before a consultant.
But his move came.
Moved it, yeah.
That he had to move. What reason was given, to your knowledge, for him having to move so quickly, abruptly, at midnight, basically?
Well, I never knew anything about it. The consultants never knew anything about a midnight flit or a midnight... on one occasion in the consultants' minutes, I don't have a very clear recollection of those meetings at all about what was said. In one of those it said it was necessary to shift him. No, it wasn't explained to us. One of the consultants there said that the bishop said it was for reason because he was a homosexual. I can't remember that, but I don't dispute it. But that's certainly possible.
See, what's surprising to so many people about this is here you've got a move, and you don't ask. Why is he being moved?
But you see, hindsight is a big help. We didn't have that then. He was just one of a number of priests. He came up and he's moved a bit often, and often, or at least on a number of occasions, one move was to the Catholic Inquiry Centre in Sydney. Well, that implies some sort of a promotion. There's no indication that there were problems. In retrospect, you could be much wiser.
And here's another thing that has confused many people, and I admit to being confused myself. Your cousin was a Monsignor in the church.
Yes.
He knew that something very awful was happening.
Yeah.
You're sitting around these consultors' meetings. I don't know how many were there, 7 or 8. There are about 3 people who knew that this guy was red hot. Mm-hmm. The bishop sitting there knew he was a pedophile, and you don't. Even the drinkers at the Apollo Bay Hotel apparently knew. Yeah. And parents and teachers, and not all, and not that many, but some, in 3 towns knew. How come you didn't?
Because we were never told. It's not just myself. The other consultants are very clear on that. We were never told. I'm not sure that even the Vicar Generals were told about something other than what occurred during their period as Vicar General. My cousin Hank was notoriously monosyllabic, except when he changed gear once in a while. He was closed on these matters completely.
Do you understand why people would think, how can this be? You've got 3 people at a meeting, maybe 4.
But that's not the major implausibility. What is so overwhelmingly implausible is that we've got probably the worst pedophile in Australia active, and we've got a bishop who didn't just give him a second chance, but repeatedly refused to act. Unless that's completely implausible, and that's the evidence is very clear. We in the consultors weren't told. Now, as I said, I left Ballarat 30 years ago. There was water to go under the bridge after I left. But the bishop and 1 or 2 of his helpers sat on this very tightly. And I think the reason for that is because if they'd mentioned to the consultants why it was happening, it would have provoked an enormous discussion. And people would have said, well, what's going on? Can we do this? Is this appropriate? What about the danger to people? And that didn't happen. That's unanimous testimony of the consultors.
So your critics would obviously say that you're the kind of guy that sits there in a meeting, knowing this bloke is abusing children, and ticking off, oh, you can go to another town and do it again. Is that in any way?
Well, nobody who knows me believes that. I mean, I might be occasionally outspoken. I might occasionally put my foot in it. But anybody who knows me would know that I wasn't going to be sitting there saying nothing if we were aware of. I was aware of that.
Now, it's beyond dispute. It's a proven thing that Bishop Malkern, sitting there, knows all this and moves these pedophiles, knows it and hides it. Have you got any explanation why he would do that and why he would lie to you guys as well?
I've often thought about that, and I've said the pattern of inactivity, it was catastrophic. I mean, so much suffering would have been stopped if he'd acted earlier, and I can't for the life of me understand why he didn't. He did do some, he did send Ridsdale off to get psychological help, and eventually, around about in the late 80s or 90s, he sent him off to an institute in the USA for this. He probably overestimated what psychology could do, but that still leaves the question. It's a great mystery. I think it just got caught deeper and deeper and deeper, and I suspect eventually it was like an animal caught in the headlights of a car, just trapped. He wasn't quite sure. And in his evidence, he said he didn't know what to do. Well, that's insufficient, inexplicable too, but I can't give any coherent reason for it.
Is it that someone had something on him?
Well, I don't know. I can't believe that. It's obviously a possibility, but I don't think so. I believe that Malkern was a very upright man.
Is it the case, there might be in some sense a middle ground here, that you were dangerously incurious as well? Do you accept that?
No, I don't think that's fair.
Because?
Because I wasn't incurious. I was, I presumed that, well, I had no knowledge that anything grossly wrong was happening, and secondly, I trusted my bishop.
But I also, you haven't helped yourself by some of the statements you've made in the witness box, and the one that really jarred with so many people, me included, was this one. And you know, I later said I accepted you had misspoken, but how did you come to say this when you were told about Ridsdale in one particular town, I think it was Inglewood, and you said, where he'd abused children, you said, "It is a sad story and wasn't of much interest to me." What did you mean to say?
Well, if you look at the excerpts, you'll see we were talking about 93 and 94 when he'd already been convicted. The conversation was thoroughly muddled, at least I was thoroughly muddled, and moved over to discussing when the incidents happened, which I didn't know about. In the 90s, I was no longer an official of the Ballarat diocese. I never liked reading about in detail about these matters, and what I said so ineffectively was that things that were professionally necessary to know, I was completely ready to study them. But to suggest from that bad slip that I was somehow uninterested in the issue is, of course, completely contradicted by the whole of my life and the whole of my my work. And I just say, a little bit in self-defence, 19.5 hours of interrogation is ain't nothing.
Well, you did it again in the sense that you were talking about a schoolboy that you trusted who warned you about another priest. You said it was a vague allegation, unspecific,
yeah.
and at school, and you said, quote, something like, I didn't do anything about it, which is in the headline, I think, of the Australian on the front page today. Pell didn't do anything about it. I didn't do anything about it.
I mean, that's a disappointing headline.
Because the truth is?
Because the truth is that at the Royal Commission, I pointed out that I went and inquired of the school chaplain whether there was anything in these stories. They were vague. I wasn't exactly sure what was being said, and the school chaplain said to me, yes, I think there is something in them. Certainly he could be very, very harsh and violent, but there was also further dimension. And he said, and the brothers are doing something about it. Now, not long after that, the man was shifted.
But not shifted into a prison. This is the problem.
No, but see, that's correct. This was 40 years ago. I, at that stage, was not aware that the Christian Brothers handled these things badly. I wasn't at all sure that the activity was grossly wrong, and I trusted them to deal with it in some appropriate way, and they shifted him.
Now, you said a couple of times in the hearings this week that you should have been more pushy. What did you mean?
Well, I was thinking more of my time in Melbourne rather than in Ballarat, where I was.
You referred in Ballarat, for example, to this complaint by a boy, and you said, for instance, that maybe you should have followed it up.
Yes, well, in the light of present understandings, I certainly should have.
One of your worst mistakes, I think you've acknowledged this, is to, years later, when Ridsdale was finally arrested and brought to court, you fatefully decided to walk him to the court. And this was widely photographed. Whenever there's a thing, the Tim Minchin song attacking you has that there, and it's portrayed as you. Here's the church standing by, yet again, a pedophile priest. What was going through your mind when you did that?
Well, I think in fairness to me, I should set out what happened. I was asked to give him a reference with the hope it would diminish his time in prison, or the punishment. I hadn't seen him for years. I was no particular friend of his at all. The records show that there was prolonged discussion with the lawyers, because I said to them I would not say or would not write a reference, and I would not go to court unless I could say I'm not disputing the charges. I want to imply no disrespect for the survivors, for the victims, and I also would insist on saying that he'd done a lot of evil, a lot of harm rather. Now, at that stage we didn't know the full list of, by any manner of means.
But you also wanted to say he'd also done some good.
I certainly did. And I didn't particularly want to do it, because while I can be a bit insensitive, I even then realised this was a bit, well, you know, put you out on the limb. I raised it with Archbishop Little and he said to me, yes, well, you go and do it. Now, the basic reason I did, you find in chapter 25 of Matthew, where the separation of the sheep from the goats at the last day, and one of the criteria that are mentioned there is whether you visit people in prison. So now that side of the reasoning is unimpeachable. What I, in my naivety, thought I stand for justice. I'm totally in favour of the rights of the victims. Because I walk him to court, the lawyer refused to let me appear. He said, well, we don't want you to do that. Would you walk him? Now, that was seen, of course, as somehow taking his side rather than the victims. I never intended it like that, and it's that I regret very, very deeply. Mind you, I'm sorry, I'd appeared as many priests go along to court cases with parishioners or somebody who want them to put in a good word. So what I was doing wasn't unique. I did it for other people during my years as a priest.
Can you see how your critics would use that, not just in the way that I originally introduced this, but in the sense of, here you have a priest, and accepting your view that you were there to comfort the sinner, as it were, but you also had the victims, and your attention was with the priest rather than the victims. Do you accept that?
It was, no, it wasn't rather. I wasn't allowed to testify because of my explicit demand that I would speak with the victim. But having said that, I realise it was seen as supporting the priest more than the victims, and I'd have to plead guilty to that, and I regret it. And I only did it once.
Let's move on to your next appointment, which was in 1987. You are moved to the Archdiocese of Melbourne under Frank Little. Now, Pope John Paul II, conservative like you, liked the cut of your jib, and you were clearly inserted as the eventual successors of Frank Little.
Well, that wasn't very clear at all. There weren't too many people who wanted that.
They may not have wanted that, but it was seen as you were the up-and-coming guy. Now, Frank Little is more of the left, or a progressive, so to speak, and you were a conservative. Did you have any notion at that stage that here we had yet another guy, Frank Little, who was moving around or covering up for dangerous and or pedophile priests?
No, I didn't. But let me say a position. I mean, it's interesting that you reckon I was clearly the bloke who was going to take over. Well, for many of the powers that be, the leadership of the Church in Melbourne at that stage, that was the one thing they didn't want. Now,
because?
First of all, I was theologically conservative. I was an academic. I came from the country, from Ballarat, and a lot of the Melbourne priests found that hard to take. Interestingly, more of them seemed to have difficulty with that than the Sydney priests when I came from interstate. But all these things were wrapped together, and on top of all that, I was a supporter of Bob Santamaria.
The notorious conservative...
The notorious conservative...
gadfly critic of the Liberals.
Yes, and also with very clear ideas on the way the Church should be going. And I think the fact that I think in many ways the Church is going better in Australia than it was 20, 25 years ago, as much to the writings of Bob Santamaria, who spread the understanding, explained what John Paul II was trying to do. And my basic thesis is, and I think it's borne out by the facts around the world, that radical liberalism in faith and morals in Catholicism destroys the Church.
And do you think that was one of the lessons of Ballarat and Melbourne?
Yes, to some extent. I mean, the Church is not destroyed in either place.
But in the sense of a lax moral or structural authoritative leadership led to what we're seeing.
Yes, it was there's no way around it. It was a colossal failure of leadership.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that leadership. One of the people that Frank Little was moving around was the priest Peter Searson. When you look at the sort of things that were known about him then, not all of them known by you, of course, but at least some of them, things like loitering around the boys' toilets, making children take confession with their head on his knee, pulling a pistol on a boy, threatening to stab a girl with a screwdriver, killing a bird.
I think he stabbed the bird with a screwdriver.
He did that too.
But I think he pointed a knife at the girl.
A knife. I apologise for the wrong choice of weapon. But basically, a very, very bad person.
Yeah.
Now, you're saying that you tried to take action, but a lot of what he had done was not known to you. You were lied to by Little, and you were lied to by the Catholic Education Office under him, who knew his full record. The Royal Commission head seemed to think that was implausible. That you could, why would they lie to you? He said. Why would they lie to you?
Well, first of all, I think there was only one man who knew nearly all that, and that was Little. Because part of the problem, there were no clear procedures and the information was compartmentalised. I'm not sure how many, if any, knew, for example, about all the problems in Sunbury, which were there before he
first
came
was
to
at Sunbury, and then he went to Doveton,
yeah,
when he came under your purview.
Now, the Education Office, once again, not everyone there, the leadership, would have known everything. It now emerges, which was never communicated to me, that the Director of Education, a very competent director and a good priest, Father Tom Doyle, had said to Little that Searson must go. I never knew that. And I'm not sure that the officials in the Catholic Education Office knew that. Now, I don't think they would have seen it as a deception of me, that they never put all their cards on the table to me.
But you actually said, you yourself said in the witness box, that they lied to you. And that's when the Royal Commissioner boss, Peter McClelland, said, why would they lie to you? He just could not believe your story, i.e., if there was a lie being told, it was by you.
Well, I'm suggesting that obviously you can describe accurately as a lie when somebody doesn't put all their cards on the table. But there are other reasons for what they would see as reticence or deception, and one of them was he's boisterous, he's not in the chain of command, he's an auxiliary.
So let's get this straight. You've got the Archbishop Little there and the Doveton School here. Now, while you're an auxiliary, one of 4 auxiliary bishops, this school is in your general area, but you're saying you didn't actually have any control over it. What power does an auxiliary bishop have?
Represents the Archbishop. It's very clear from all the evidence that complaints generally went to the Vicar General, representing the Archbishop. The diocese was strongly centralised. And in the schools, they went sometimes through the regional consultant, but directly to the office of the Director of Education. It was even quite unusual that a deputation came to me.
Which it did.
Which it did. And in retrospect, I suppose that indicated dissatisfaction with the ordinary avenues.
So this is a bunch of teachers with a long list of complaints about this bloke, and what did you do about it?
Well, you see, what is interesting is what they did is compatible with the view I took and what Little told me. Because they came to complain and they said, we don't want him removed, we think he's a very odd man, but we want something done, him to be spoken to.
But they knew enough of what I've just said. I mean, you don't even need to know that he's a pedophile to think this bloke is a fruitcake and a menace and should be nowhere near any child. And yet, even with that message,
if they'd said that to me, but they didn't.
So.
And the records show that, and the records also show that the union rep was disappointed. But he didn't.
But here's my point. I'm all right. I've got a reputation too for being a head kicker. Now, if someone came to me and said, the knife, the this, the that, the child's head on the leg, kids are scared to be near the toilets, all that kind of stuff, I wouldn't say, oh, what do you want me to do? I'd say, you know what I'm going to do? Out. That's what I would say.
Well, you might have said that, and if you'd had the power, you would have been able to do it. I had no power to put anybody out, but what I did do was I went to Little. And I told him this story, and I said, you know, what can be done? And the story was, which I believed, I was aware there were problems. I explicitly remember the list of
appalling behaviour.
Of appalling behaviour. There's no, there is reference. There's no explicit accusation of paedophilia, and the line that was given to me was, yes, there is some fire. A lot of it is smoke, and we haven't got enough grounds to get rid of him.
What was Little not telling you about this Peter Searson?
Well, I saw, just in preparation for the Royal Commission, a page and a half of offences complaints at Sunbury. I was totally...
Previous appointment?
Yes, and I mean, if that was known, of course, that's very cumulative. Even if the matters themselves are not of the gravest nature. I didn't know that.
Was Little sitting on any allegations at that stage of paedophilia?
I don't know when he knew about the woman called Julie Stewart. Now, what eventually was told to me was the police have investigated this and decided not to go ahead. We got the Education Office, and this is certainly true, got Minter Ellison in, the lawyers, to investigate the evidence. And what I was told was they said, you know, we can't do anything. What in fact they recommended was that an investigation, a formal investigation, take place. Now, I didn't realise that dimension of it. I'm not even sure whether... I don't think I ever saw the Minter Ellison report at that stage. But see, auxiliaries were peripheral to the actual executive running of the Archdiocese.
But is this, you've referred to a number of times this week the fact that the times were different then. And here we had, of course, yes, there was a complaint to police. The police did not prosecute. We've heard about complaints of another pedophile priest to the Crown Solicitor at the time in Victoria, who declined. He said no evidence to prosecute, although he actually thought the guy was a menace to children. We've had parents complaining to the priest, but not to the police. We had the child of a policeman molested, and even then, no charges were proffered.
Yeah, well,
we had a priest bathing naked with naked boys in a river, and none of the parents took it to the police. What do you make of all that?
Well, the radical differences were in comparison with the 70s. From the mid-80s, at least at the level of bishops, and they tried to spread that understanding, we were getting a much better understanding. So we couldn't claim a total insensitivity from the middle 80s onwards at all.
Is your point merely more that this blindness to what was happening was, well, probably worse than the Church, but shared to some extent wider than the Church?
Oh, I think there's no doubt whatsoever about that. I mean, there's the evidence from the psychiatrist in '75 about Ridsdale of the policeman ringing him up and saying, we know, or what we think, Ridsdale's a pedophile, we're not going to do anything about it, but we're pleased that you're giving him treatment. And the psychiatrist, I think, the psychiatrist said, I'm treating him for anxiety. I'm not a specialist in this. So,
do you think you're being held to a different standard than other organs of the state or society?
I think that's certainly something to be examined, and I think in many ways we are. But having said that, See, this is a problem right across society, and one of the things the Royal Commission has established is it goes across all institutions, government and religious. But having said that, there's a disproportionate amount of it. There was in the Catholic Church. We've got to plead guilty to that.
Now, you did in fact replace Frank Little. He was pushed out, effectively,
Yes.
4 years early, and Pope John Paul II's man on the spot, you took over. Now, within 3 months, of course, you had the first compensation scheme for victims, and you got rid of Searson.
Yeah, but more important than that, my first priority was never compensation. My first priority was that the wrongs would be recognised and that counselling would be available, and the compensation was the third matter. My priority has never been simply or primarily to save money for the Church. I've always said right from the beginning we should pay according to the national standards, and if you look at my record in both Melbourne and Sydney, you will find that comparatively I was, the diocesan payments compensation were amongst the most generous of the Catholic institutions and actually of any institution.
The critics say that it was you were in fact pushed by then Premier Jeff Kennett to set up that compensation scheme, or he'd call the Royal Commission.
No, well, that's an interesting story, and it goes back I was at a fundraising dinner. I was very friendly with the governor, McGarvey. I respected him, and McGarvey said to me, "I'd like to talk to you about your problems." And I said, "Oh, what are they?" And he said, "You know, the pedophilia." Now, he said, "Get into gear and do something, otherwise you'll bleed to death for many years." He said, "Set up a Catholic Royal Commission. Make it independent and get them to judge it." And I thought that was terrific advice. I was involved in a major controversy with Kennett over the Catholic hospital. There was some that St Vincent's, the government wanted to shift it out. I objected strongly to that, and I was speaking with the Premier on that matter, and he said to me he said there will be no Royal Commission, but he said you clean it up. And I said, yes, I'm happy to do that. And as a matter of fact, I said, I've been speaking to McGarvey, and McGarvey said set up something like a Catholic Royal Commission.
So you deny that you were pushed into it?
Well, yes, and it was exactly the way that I said. The Premier was concerned, the Premier wanted something done, but it was exactly the way I've described it. And I was able to say to him what we were already proposing to do.
Your critics say that because of what happened, they don't credit you with the clean-up thing. They say you should have acted before, etc., etc. They say that this disqualifies you from the job that you got next, well, after Sydney, which is where you are now, the third most senior Catholic leader in the world, in charge of the finances, effectively the treasurer of the Vatican. That you're a man of cover-up. What are you doing in the Vatican?
Well, what evidence is there of a cover-up? Yeah, it's very
I'm saying that's the allegation, but we've dealt with that.
There's no evidence. I mentioned that at the Royal Commission, so there's no shred of evidence, and that was uncontested by.
But should there be a perception that, man of cover-up, that's perception, be in charge of the Vatican finances?
Well, there's no man of cover-up in charge of any Vatican finances. And we're all obliged...
How can you assert that?
On my record.
Which is?
I've appeared before the parliamentary inquiry.
No, in terms of the Vatican. Because I've heard, for example, that corruption is endemic in the Vatican. True or not?
That's an over-exaggeration. It's not endemic. But the Pope coming back from Africa and said there is corruption in the financial section, much less than there was. and we're working systematically to eliminate that.
How high up does this corruption go?
Well, that's a very good.
To the level
question.
of cardinals?
Well, who knows?
To the level of the Pope?
Oh no, certainly not.
So maybe the cardinals.
Pope Francis is backing.
No, I'm just trying to establish the level. So not the Pope. You don't know about the cardinals. What about one up from the cardinals? Say under secretary level. That level.
Oh, well, an under-secretary is not one up from a cardinal. I think you go Pope Cardinal.
But at a very high level.
Well, these things need to be established.
How much money are we talking about?
We're talking about millions. Within different Vatican agencies. I mean, in the euro, that's called the Vatican Bank. It isn't actually. It's the Bank for the Vatican Employees, Religious Orders and Dioceses. Well, I think they've closed 3,000 or 4,000 accounts.
3,000 or 4,000
accounts of people who had no right to have an account there, and of course the danger is that those accounts were being used for money laundering. Now,
by the mafia?
Who knows whether it's the mafia or some other big criminal organisation. That's very difficult to establish.
But there are senior figures involved, obviously. Are we talking about money that they've just put off the books, or money that's actually going to where it shouldn't go?
Certainly the first. I mean, see, when we moved, the Pope appointed me and accepted the recommendations of this Gosseo group. He set up a group of 8 or 9 experts to look at it. Nobody could say what the financial situation of the Vatican was accurately. Nobody knew. Now, one of the interesting things we discovered was that there was 1.4 billion euros worth of assets which weren't on the books, which is quite something. So that's there. And already some examples of corruption are public knowledge. In the last years of John Paul II, property worth 150 million was sold for 90 million.
Where did the 60 go?
Well, I suppose, the properties were taken by people and they subsequently did something with them, and obviously they had a margin of 60 million theoretically to put into their pockets. Their public accusations of financial manipulation, combination between a Vatican agency and an outside banker.
Do you see how it sounds? You've got corruption and cover up moral corruption with children in Ballarat and Bendigo being abused. Financial corruption here. Are you proud of your church?
Look, I'm here trying to do with the finances what I did to clean up corruption in the pedophilia in Melbourne. There are two different worlds, but I'm doing similar. I'm part of a team. We now have internal auditor, a very senior man, completely independent. We've now got PricewaterhouseCoopers as external auditors. We've got a group called IFE, which supervises the bank, and we're cooperating under the supervision of, say, Monival, and we have to report to them regularly about what we're doing.
Can I go back now? The week before you gave evidence to the Royal Commission again, third time, a leak appeared in the papers that Victorian police are investigating you for abusing children yourself, between 5 and 10 victims. What did you make of that leak?
Oh, well, I mean, it was extraordinary. It's completely false. There'd been no approach to me. One of the interesting things is that when you become a hate figure, people either imagine, or I don't know, the worst stories about you. Now, 3 of the accusations about just to switch out the Royal Commission, that I was told this and told that. 3 of those are demonstrably false.
That's the boy who said he warned you because he knocked on your presbytery door just after school when in fact your house was 2 kilometres away, a different house.
That's right.
And you were working full time, you wouldn't have been home anyway.
That's right.
And then another one was about you celebrating a mass in Ballarat and telling a priest, Jerry, excuse the language, has been rooting young boys again,
yes.
Jerry Drisdale.
Yes.
When the mass didn't occur, there's no record of it, and the priest was in another diocese 200 kilometres away.
He was another parish 200 kilometres away.
So what does that tell you about what's happening?
Well, I don't know what to make of it. I mean, there's another example too, where I was supposed to have been rude to a fellow and told him to run away when he was complaining, and I was in Europe. I don't know what to make of it. But I do know that it's evidence that people, at the very minimum, will jump at shadows.
But does this suggest to you, you know, you have become a lightning rod for the accusations, and I accept what you say. Some of those accusations are plainly untrue. The police one must be devastating for you. You know, you are an abuser yourself, they're suggesting. Before I go into the question I was aiming for there, do you suspect anything going on in the Victoria Police? Because I've previously given evidence to a former Victorian inquiry that turned out to exaggerate some of your culpability. They said you were, you know, demanding gag orders. If you were going to compensate anyone, you'd have to sign gag orders. That wasn't true. You weren't encouraging people to go to police. That wasn't true. And the number of suicides was grossly inflated as well. Do you suspect this pattern and now this leak?
I don't know what to make of it. It could be that the police commissioner is badly briefed, badly informed. I don't know, but.
You put it on the police commissioner.
No, well, I said he could be badly informed. I don't know where the well, I don't know where the leak came from, but I don't know where the misinformation is coming from.
But given that you are then the lightning rod and the hate figure, let's step back. You say you're innocent, and you know you put your case. Christ, the founder of this faith, this church, was an innocent man who died for the sins of others. Has it ever occurred to you that in some sense you might follow that example by resigning, innocent as you say you are, for the sake of the church and just...
No, I wouldn't resign. That would be taken as an admission of guilt. I mean, if the Holy Father asked me to, I'd point this out, but I'd do whatever he wanted. But there's...
You've got to give your resignation formally in turning 75 this year, don't you?
Yes, yeah, well that's, and obviously like everybody else I will do that. That might or mightn't be accepted, but that would be part of the normal battle. Not 4 years early or 8 years early.
One of the things that's surprising to me, I've met you, as I say, 4 times before, and again yesterday I've met you, and I was struck by one really interesting thing. Your public appearances, you seem stiff and authoritative, and privately you seem a warmer guy. And this was really brought to bear with me yesterday when my wife rang and said, you'd met the victims, the survivors yesterday, and you read a statement. She said the words were great, but you seemed so, you know, unmoved and almost like a Mount Rushmore kind of thing. I actually saw you when you came back from that meeting, and I have to say you were euphoric. It seemed you were so happy and relieved and moved. Can I go through that? One, it seemed to me that you were scared of what your reception would be from the victims, who included David Ridsdale, the nephew of and victim of Gerald Ridsdale. Were you scared going into that meeting?
I suppose you could use that word. I was...
Scared of what?
I was scared that we go backwards rather than forwards.
That they'd hate you?
No, well, I mean, 1 or 2 of them, at least initially, did. No, I accepted that. But I didn't want a punch-up that made things worse.
For you?
No, for the church, for them. And
you set the church first. So
I guess, well, that's perhaps a Freudian slip, but certainly I didn't I want us to go forward, and we did.
And you were, am I right to say euphoric? Did I miss?
No, I wouldn't have said euphoric. I was deeply relieved. I found it very, very emotional, the meeting.
Why don't you show those emotions?
Well, that's, I'm a bit buttoned up. That's the way in which I was trained. I suppose partly personality, and it's also to survive. You know, if you continue, I've dealt for 20 years with this, the offenders, and also, you know, I've got to deal with these financial things. Now you've got to keep yourself together, and sometimes you come through as too much armour plated, and you can't judge a book by its cover. The fact that somebody seems a bit wooden doesn't necessarily mean that inside they're...
Are you wooden inside?
No, I don't think so in the slightest.
Does it sound, do you sometimes... It seems to me that the public is waiting for that clunk moment, you know, he gets it, and wanting to see an emotional response from you. Do you think that they need to see that you get it?
I'd like them to, but I do get it, and my actions show that I get it. Now, another little dimension that might help explain the word, I wasn't a bad footballer. I didn't play for the seconds.
I saw you a bit of a thug.
Well, I was very fiery. I've got a formidable temper, which I almost never show. But the discipline that is needed by me not to lapse in that way, I think helps explain my wooden appearance.
You know what really struck me too, and pardon the impertinence because I wasn't there and I barely know you, but David Ridsdale has accused you of saying, you know, which you hotly deny, of effectively trying to bribe him not to go to the police, when in fact the police were at his door virtually. But anyway, leave that to one side. He's been an accuser of you. And you have this meeting yesterday with him, among the other victims. And it struck me that you came away feeling so relieved. I thought euphoric, you dispute that, but you were bouncing around very happy. That in a sense, a cardinal and a victim, and the roles were reversed, and the victim now has the power, David Ridsdale has the power that you've had all your career, which is to offer solace to someone and say, you're forgiven, I accept. Is that what you're looking for from David Ridsdale?
Pretty well. Now, I'm a friend of Ridsdale's. I've always been a friend of Ridsdale. I shouldn't say Ridsdale, David. I think in all of this he recognises that. He certainly acknowledges it now. If there's one thing in all these terrible muck-ups that I regret, is the misunderstanding with him and the way it's been fought out publicly. So, I mean, I knew the family. I was quite friendly with his dad, who did a lot with me. So it was there's an added grief when you're in public controversy with somebody whom you in fact like, and whose family you like. So I mean, the reconciliation between us was deeply moving.
What do you want him to do?
Well, we're going to cooperate with him. He wants to do this and that.
No, but there's a personal thing.
Oh, well, we'll keep in contact. And I got no doubt he wants me to help him work to help the survivors.
Be a man of practice. Yeah, it's interesting, you know, when I launched your book of sermons, I think it was called Be Not Afraid.
That's correct.
And I think you said that was your favourite phrase from the Bible. It's almost like the phrase for a warrior churchman. Be not afraid, charge. And I said, my favourite phrase was, come unto me. Yes. Come unto me, all ye that are heavily burdened and tired, and that one is a fight and one is surrendering yourself. Do you think that perhaps it's time for you to surrender yourself almost, that you are in a position almost of a penitent, not necessarily for your own sins at all, but for what happened to these victims? You need to be seen like that.
Yes, I like to be seen, but that's not the important thing. The fundamentally important thing is to do it. Now, let me say, be not afraid. Do you think it was easy for me to step in and clean up things in Melbourne? Do you think it's easy for me? I'd have a much quieter life here in Rome if I didn't have to draw. I'm not a fool. I understand a deal of the problems that I'm going to get, and you need to decide to do it. You need to conquer your fears. Every one of us who are leading the financial reforms here in the Vatican have been blackguarded in the press.
And your enemies are using this to do that too?
Yes.
And is that why you've hidden documents from your corruption investigation around the world, by the way?
I haven't hidden any documents.
You've kept them in different places.
Yeah, we have, so they can't be robbed. I mean, we have their own copies, but we have we've made certain that vital evidence can't be taken from us because it's here or there or other places.
And finally, and thank you for your time. You gave evidence in Rome rather than fly back to Australia because you attended specialists about your health, particularly your heart. People looking at you will say, now here's a man, all right, you're 74, but you look in some good nick. What is the story? Are we ever going to see you back in Australia?
Oh, I hope so. I hope so.
So why couldn't you have come back for this?
Well, it would have taken time. The doctors were quite clear that a long direct trip at a short interval was something that wasn't, they didn't recommend. I mean, I've got a job here, and as I've explained, it's an important job. I hope to get back to Australia. That'll depend on my health, and I might even go back in stages. But there's no doubt about my heart condition, unfortunately. I mean, I've collapsed twice after long distance trips. I've had a pacemaker inserted, I've had an angioplasty. Both of those were provoked by travel between Australia and Rome. I'm probably travelling a bit better now than I was health-wise. The medication has been balanced out, but I had 2 falls. Now, you might just simply because I was awkward, and I, you know, this hasn't been easy. These last 4 days, and so when I wasn't on at the Royal Commission, for most of the rest of the time I was just resting, trying to get myself together for the next performance.
What do you think, what do you hope Australians watching will have seen of you in talking to me?
I hope that they will give the Catholic Church a fair go. I hope that they will understand the truth of the situation. I fully concede the terrible crimes that have happened.
Not give you a fair go?
Well, I'd like them to give me a fair go, but you know, I'd take that as a good. Everybody needs a fair go, and certainly the Catholic Church is entitled to that. And we haven't done badly over the last 20 years.
Again, you're talking about the Church, and I'm saying George Pell.
Yeah, well, I'm a Christian. I'm a priest. Now, I might have put the Church first rather than for a while, rather than the victims. But I'm certainly not here to put myself first. We're not into that.
George Pell, thank you so much for your time.
Good, Andrew. Thank you.